What is your most terrifying animal encounter? Story 1. I'm from Florida, and I was volunteering at a local nature conservancy. One of our tasks was to remove fallen logs that were blocking up a creek after a big storm. The creek was about chest deep, 15 feet wide, and opaque brown. Many Florida freshwater ways are browns because of tannins leached into the river from trees. As I'm moving logs, I notice a 12 feet alligator on the embankment I hadn't noticed before. It then slid into the creek I was in. I was with a land manager who was moving logs with me, and a herpetologist who was in the canoe. I asked them what to do, and they responded, "Well, those logs aren't gonna move themselves, and that gator's probably just trying to get away from us." Still, spending 30 minutes in a creek, you can't see anything, knowing there's an alligator lurking near your feet. Moving logs which look like alligators was one of the most nerve-wracking things I've ever done. Story 2. I've been woken up by a bear sniffing my head once. Was cowboy camping no tent in Lyell Canyon in Yosemite once when I hear something sniff right next to my head. My sleep-addled brain thinks it's a ranger on a horse telling me to move my camp. Had hiked about 20 miles that day. You have to be at least 4 miles into the canyon to camp. And I wasn't 100% sure I'd made it far enough since it was dark when I set up camp. Anyways, I say, just 1 second, sit up, grope for my flashlight, and turn it on to see a black bear a couple feet away. I holler, he tears off. I get out and empty my bladder and try to fall back asleep until I hear him coming around again. I make a bunch more noise, decide I'm not getting any more sleep, break camp, and slowly night hike until the sun rises. Story 3. When I was 12, a young stallion decided he wanted to play with me and almost killed me. He kicked and bit me and tried to trample me. He was my pet and was only treating me the way he'd treat a peer. I even knew that while it was happening. I made a huge mistake by turning my back on him while he was playful. He bit me and pulled me down, knocked me down a couple of more times with a forefoot when I tried to get up, reared up over me to stamp me a couple of times too. Still have the scar on my leg, and that was a long time ago. Literally pissed myself during. My dad basically saved my life by chasing him off. His response was, "That was close. What did you learn?" Story 4. At the time, I was working until 1 a.m., so I wouldn't get home until 2 or so. I opened the door to the house and felt what I thought was a breeze come by my leg. I don't really pay attention, walk over to my desk, put my keys down, and turn the light on. Right when I do so, there are 2 possums in the act of mating in the middle of my kitchen. They screamed, I screamed, and we began the 3-hour dance of getting them out of my house. I ended up trapping them in a dog cage and dumping them out in the middle of my backyard. Edit. To avoid confusion, they were opossums, not their Australian cousins. Story 5. I moved to Colorado. About a month and 1 night, I had gone to bed and woke up on severe pain hours later. I felt nausea, throbbing pain around my abdomen, my muscles and back ached. I turned on the lights, and I had in my sleep rolled over a black widow spider and crushed it to death, which at some point had bit me. Its carcass lay in my bed. I freaked out, called, and put it in a mason jar so they thought I wasn't crazy. I was brought to the hospital where they treated me with pain management medications. The venom continued to spread. Every muscle ached and felt as though my body was being crushed. It soon began to get hard to breathe, and my blood pressure became irregular. The morphine has me drifting in and out of sleep. I prayed to God, who hours earlier I wasn't even sure I believed in. 12 hours I discharged. The venom ran its course for about 4 days, and he bite site intermittently itched for weeks. For the next year or 2, I had anxiety trying to go to sleep and recurring nightmares of the experience. Crap, black widow spiders. Story 6. I was very drunk at a wedding on a large property in rural NSW. I like to wander and explore when I drink. I was alone and suddenly confronted with a wombat. Wombats are massive balls of muscle. Being the drunk idiot I was all like, "Aw, hello me wombat," and began to approach it. The wombat did not like this. It charged me. It was so fast. My heart stopped, and I turned and ran as fast as I could. The little bugger nearly caught me. I sprinted back to the wedding in fear for my life. Story 7. Growing up, my grandma babysat me. She lived with my uncle. He had a Rottweiler who was very friendly. One day, when I was 9 to 10, I decided I wanted to pretend to be a wrestler. I did this by putting white masking tape on my hands and arms. I ended up fighting stuffed animals and all that. When I got tired, I just grabbed some action figures and went to the carport, which had deer stands. East was where the Rottweiler also slept. So the dog was asleep when I got there. I started playing with the toys. A few minutes later, I heard the dog stirring. I pay no mind to it. I then hear growling. I turn around, and the dog is growling at me. I try to let her know it is me, but she is still growling. I then slowly back away, and she lunges at me. Being the somewhat smart kid I was, I noticed immediately she was going for my arms. I rip off the masking tape, throw it at the dog, and run back into the house. Avoided that dog for days until I was asked to feed her. She was friendly again. Story 8. When I was just 5 years old, my neighbor had a Doberman who was usually very friendly dog, however. One day I go into his backyard to ride one of his bikes that he usually lets me ride. As I was exiting the backyard, the Doberman jumped on me and knocked me to my butt and pinned me down, staring me in the face, growling viciously. Eventually, when neighbor comes out of the house and yelled at him, "Damien, get back in here." I don't know if that dog ever wanted to really kill me or just scare me. Story 9. I was cycling up a mountain in the Scottish Highlands. My gran lives there. And as I went round a corner, I came face to face with a huge Highland cow which was running down the mountain the opposite way. Instead of jumping off the path, I thought the cow was be friendly and edge over to let me by. Big mistake. It threw its head as I went by, almost impaling me and throwing me off the path and into a 20 feet tumble down the mountain. Story 10. I outran a swarm of bees. I was young and in Strya, and we lived on the front of a farm. I went exploring a lot. It was really cool. I found a bee's nest in a huge fallen tree. I had watched a lot of cartoons and wanted to know if the bees would come out in an arrow and get me if I whacked it with a stick. So I did. They did not. I was disappointed and climbed around the fallen tree. The bees do attack, just not immediately, and not in an arrow, in a cloud. Suddenly they wee all around me. I sprinted home about 2K, and if I slowed down, the bees caught up. I ran into our yard and shut the gate, thinking I was safe. I wasn't, obviously, and got stung a few times. I deserved it though. Don't go beating up animal homes. Story 11. When I was young, I went fishing with my dad and my best friend. We waded out through some deeper water to reach the shallow sandbar, where we fished for quite a while. The tide came in, and the water that had been just above my ankles was now above my waist. Suddenly, a large shark, about 7 to 8 feet, crashed through a school of mullet only a few feet away from me. Dad saw it, my best friend saw it, and for a second we all three just kind of froze with our mouths hanging open. Quietly, calmly, Dad told us to walk back to shore, splashing as little as possible. We did. But the tide had come in, and I wasn't as tall as the other two guys. The deeper water between the sandbar and shore reached their chests, but I could hardly keep my head above water while my feet barely bounced along the bottom, and I struggled to hold my fishing rod up out of the water. I was completely helpless, while we knew that a hungry shark was swimming somewhere in the area. It felt like a scene out of a nightmare, trying to run from an invisible monster. But my feet could barely touch the ground, and I was hardly moving. I know, and even knew in that moment, that I had little chance of being eaten by a shark, especially one who is focused on fish. Still, if I ever were to be attacked, that was the moment, and I was utterly defenseless. A few years later, a man was killed just a few miles away when he jumped off his dock and into the path of a large bull shark that was chasing mullet. Story 12. I was solo hiking in the Porcupine Mountains in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan last autumn. Although I was by myself, there were plenty of other backpackers up there those couple of. I ran across a bear print in the trail one morning. A few hours later, I rounded a corner of the trail, and about 70 feet up ahead, I saw the hindquarters of an animal with dark brown fur about 2 feet high. I got a surge of adrenaline and everything started going in slow motion. I started to panic, and just as the poop was about to leave my butt, the animal lifted its head and it ended up being a black Labrador retriever. Right as I catch my breath, the dog's owner came rounding the corner from the opposite direction and sees me clutching my chest. Story 13. When I was 5, I lived in Berlin, Germany. I had an obsession with trying to hunt and kill wild boars in the forest, so my dad and I would walk around with spears, sharpened twigs, basically. We never saw any, so it wasn't a huge deal, until one day we spooked a mother and her piglets. Next thing my dad sees is me chasing them until the sow stops, turns all 200 pounds towards me and stares me down. Luckily, my dad scooped me up before I could charge because I was about to. Hindsight 20/20ths, don't do that. I would have probably been mauled. Story 14. Getting charged by a black bear. I was hunting elk and walking on an old 90-year-old railroad grade in some dense forest, and I see some movement in a tree. I get to looking, and it is 2 bear cubs. Oh crap. I look around, and though a somewhat clear spot for the trees, I see Mom, and she is headed right for me at this point. I was hunting with a fairly large rifle, a 375 hours and H Magnum, so I decided to give her one warning shot, and if I had to shoot a second time, it would be in self-defense. I put 1 round into the dirt in front of her, and thankfully she decided that the cannon that just fired at her was something she didn't want any part of, and she scrambled back and took off into the brush. I also noped the crap out of there and didn't go that way the rest of the season. She can have that spot. Story 15. I have a few good animal stories, but the scariest was getting charged by an angry bull shark. I was down in Florida with my family, and my dad, brother 11, and sister 6 were all decently far out hanging out when we spotted the shark. Was probably between 4.5 feet. My dad and I went shoulder to shoulder with my siblings behind us and started quickly but calmly heading in. This thing must have charged us nearly half a dozen times at or near full speed and only broke off when it got within 15 feet. I don't know if you've ever seen a shark hunt at full speed, but they're significantly faster than I could sprint on land. The feeling was we're in its world, and if it wants one of us, it's probably going to take one. So we finally get in, and the shark heads down the beach. I look down, and there's another family with a small girl in a life jacket out in the water. So I run down and yell to them, but they aren't listening. I figured I'm bigger than it, and if it were going to attack me, it would have. So I start swimming out to them. I popped up about 15 feet from the girl with the dad on her other side, and that shark was right in between us. Without thinking about it, I jumped forward and slapped the water, and I think spooked it. I jumped forward and grabbed the girl, which the dad, who hadn't seen the shark, didn't appreciate, LOL. I pointed it out and gave him back his daughter, and we got back in. He was incredibly thankful once he understood the situation. But yeah, sharks have barely changed in hundreds of millions of years. And that day, I truly appreciated exactly why. Like I said, if it had wanted to take me, I don't realistically think the 4 of us could have actually stopped it. Story 16th. I was attacked by a giant monstrous goose. It was at least the size of a goose, and it was as wild and dangerous as a goose. Okay, it was just a normal goose. But it was really scary. I was just minding my own business, taking a walk while listening to music, when this evil creature decides that I'm its mortal enemy and starts charging me out of nowhere. Thanks to my vigorous training and extensive experience, I handled the situation in calm and stoic fashion, by shrieking like a girl and punching the critter on top of its head. And then, not unlike a small child that has just kicked a ball through the neighbor's window, I panicked and ran the crap away. I am the living embodiment of masculinity. Story 17. Just last week, went to walk into the toilet at home, only to discover a massive green tree frog in the doorway. Not scary to some, I know, but I have a phobia about them, and was absolutely pant crap, terrifyingly, out of my mind, screaming, scared. Hit the hallway wall while screaming for my husband, and then sat on top of the kitchen table while he took the frog outside, in case it got loose and hopped around and attacked my legs. My family think it's hysterically funny, and continue to give me frog-themed gifts at Xmas and birthday. They're all sitting in a box in the cupboard ADN. I refuse to look at them. Story 18. I was tree planting in northern BC, was working on the same piece as another planter for about an hour, then heard a soft thumping sound, looked up and saw an adult grizzly bear running towards the other planter, whose back was to the bear. I started running towards it, waving my arms and yelling. The bear stopped, turned towards me and stood on its hind legs. I stopped moving and was about 20 to 30 feet away from it. The bear stared at me for about 5 seconds, felt like an eternity, dropped back down, turned around and bolted back into the tree line. Saw 2 cubs with it that we weren't anywhere close to, so we figured it was probably a mother teaching its cubs how to hunt. I had to sit down for a while after that because my legs were shaking so bad. Story 19. Magpies. I was riding my bike to primary school one day, and 2 streets away, out of nowhere, I feel the flap of wings on my shoulder and it flies by in front of me. It was quite large, probably an adult, and it came back, but I saw it and ducked. After that, it flew by a few more times, repeatedly actually, and it actually hit me a few times hard and left a few beak dents in my helmet. I could only peg my bike as fast as possible to school until I was through its territory. Quite a few other instances being swooped by the black and white death birds, But another time with friends, I gave myself a bleeding nose after ducking and slamming my face on my own bike's handlebar. My friends thought that was funny. Story 20. When my partner and I went to Bali, we went on a walk around Sanur. We figured we'd take a shortcut back to our resort going down what looked like a pathway. Turns out it was a dead end, but no problem. We turned back. Problem is, this square-headed dog that looks like a mixed pit bull is now standing on the pathway snarling at us. I'm pretty okay with animals usually, even if they're aggressive I can keep my cool, but this dog looks like he's one half blink away from mauling us. It's mangy as crap with a crazy glint in its eyes too. And with how prevalent rabies is in Indonesia, I'm freaking the crap out. We edge around this dog painfully slow so as not to provoke it, and any movement that's a little quicker than snail pace tenses its muscles and growl barks. We got out okay, but I swear it was only by the skin of our teeth. That thing wanted meat.